Welcome to the Been There, Done That podcast with Angela Dunn Cartledge. Hey there, it's Angela from Been There, Done That. If you're navigating the wild, unpredictable world of grief, I want to invite you to something special. It's called Messy Mornings, and it's our free weekly newsletter filled with real talk, gentle reminders, and support that actually meets you where you are. Each week, I'll send you stories, reflections, healing prompts straight to your inbox. No fluff, no pressure, just the space to release, feel, and heal. You don't have to do this alone. Head over to donethatpodcast.com and sign up for Messy Mornings. It's totally free and it's made with you in mind. I've been there, and let's walk through this together. Hey, y'all. This is the Been There, Done That podcast, and I am your host, Angela Dunn Cartledge, and I am here with my new good friend, Loretta. So thank you so much for being here, Loretta.
Great to talk to you.
I would love for you to introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about what brought you to the show and what your passion is.
Sure. My passion is understanding the brain that we've inherited from animals and how it controls our emotions and how we can redirect it. We're better off not looking at it as the enemy, but as a rider on the horse that we can guide it. So to do this, I created the Inner Mammal Institute. Before that, I was a professor of international management for 25 years. And I wrote a book. So I took early retirement and I wrote a book, Habits of a Happy Brain, Retrain Your Brain to Boost Your Serotonin, Dopamine, Oxytocin, and endorphin levels. And that's all based on how these chemicals work in animals.
What I love to talk about is, as humans, we tend to get stuck in our processes and definitely in our thought processes around what has happened to us in the past. And so I really am interested in sort of seeing and gleaning as much as we can about what you see in your research and in your knowledge base about what our brains do to us in those moments. So we can start there. What, from a very foundational perspective, what can we know about what our brains are thinking about when we have pain, whether that be physical or mental? What happens to us in those moments?
So pain is this chemical called cortisol. It's often called the stress chemical, but it's useful to know that, like in the state of nature, it would be the brain's signal that something is wrong. And like if you're hungry, your low blood sugar triggers cortisol. So what triggers it is either real physical pain or anything that you've linked to pain in your past. Now, these links are real physical pathways in the brain, and those pathways are mostly built when we're young because that's when our brain has a lot of the road building material called myelin. So every one of us is seeing the world through the lens of these old pathways built from a past moment of pain. So we can all easily go negative, and so we're all challenged to broaden our vision rather than just always having these pain goggles on all the time.
Absolutely. I love how you called it going negative. There's always pain, right? There's always some form of pain that we are all experiencing. So then what? What happens after we have these pathways that are deeply or not deeply ingrained?
Sure. So in that moment of pain, the brain is designed to seek relief. So, for example, like if a lion bites you, then you want to pull away from the lion. So running from pain is the way our, verbal human brain would explain it. I might call it relief from pain. So what relieves pain? When a baby is born, it's crying But a baby doesn't know what food is. It just cries because that's the only relief strategy that's inborn. But over time, the baby's brain learns that food comes and that relieves the pain of hunger. And then the baby links everything related to the food to a positive feeling. So that's basically what we keep doing throughout life. So anything that relieved pain when you were young, then that is what your brain sees as the answer. So a simple example could be a kid picks up a video game and they stop dwelling on a problem when they're thinking about the video game. So their brain wires in the idea that the video game is the answer.
Similarly to the way our brain would respond in any numbing situation, right? That would then become, oh, cool, that's an easy relief path. I'm gonna head that direction. Um, that's that's really interesting. Okay, so then we are aware of a pain path. We see we're experiencing something, so we are aware of that pain path, and then we are either distracting or we have attention. Is that an accurate description of what could be happening there?
Uh, we're not necessarily aware of the pain path. We tend to think when we feel this pain that it's a real external threat, that something bad is actually happening. So the bad feeling tells your, higher intelligence to go out and look for evidence of a threat because you're just so learning to trust your own brain that when you feel bad, then something bad must actually be happening. The animal impulse is to fix it, to make it stop. So making it stop in nature takes action. So whether in our ancestors they were hungry, they had insects and rodents and snakes and all kinds of threats. So when you felt pain, you wanted action. And even, when they found enough food, they had to find water. So there was always one kind of pain. And it was like, well, which is the worst pain I'm having right now? So I could focus my action on that. So that's what it was designed to do. But for each individual, that gets wired from early experience. So, for example, if our ancestor has enough food and needs water, well, how do you look for water? That was wired in from their early learning. So today, now we're interpreting our emotions with our early learning of whatever worked, whatever the people around us did to respond to their emotions, to quote unquote fix it.
And then we just create we relive that pattern. We learned it, so then we do that again. What happens when our path to relief is inaccurate? It isn't actually giving us the relief that we think it is. It's just that that's what we learned from a very young age as being the way to get there. The thing I'm thinking of right off the top of my head is hunger. Just to your example, that you learned that berries were the thing that what you could eat, but then you go and eat berries and you get sick. Like, where is it that we find the new way of doing that?
Good question. So it's important to realize that these pathways are real physical things in your brain. And the reason we use an old pathway is because it's so efficient. The electricity in your brain flows like water in a storm. It flows into whatever pathway is well developed, whatever nearby pathway, meaning related to that context. So, how do you build a new pathway? It's hard. So I explain it's like trying to divert a river into a soda straw. And it's important to know that so that we forgive ourselves. And then we have to be willing to tackle this challenge. So if you make the soda straw bigger and bigger, that makes it easier to divert the river into it. So that's basically the challenge. And the more realistic example I use it's like learning a foreign language, because when you're young, you learn a foreign language without effort. But then if you try to learn one in adulthood, it takes a lot of repetition. So most people don't do it. And it's the same with emotions. We learn them when we're young without effort. So it's hard to believe that you could learn new emotional responses, but it takes so much repetition that most people give up.
That is really powerful to hear, that practice concept, right? That we are always, especially in our Western society, always looking for a huge jump forward. We want to get all the way, if not all the way to the finish line. We want to get as close as we possibly can in one jump. And yet that isn't really how sustainability works. In order for us to get there, we have to do it in over and over and over again in smaller little chunks. Um,
Yes.
but I totally hear what you're saying, especially about foreign language. I've always heard that foreign language is so much easier to learn when you're learning it alongside your native language. That you if you can learn two languages at once, or even teaching babies to swim is always so much easier than waiting until they're more older and they have more fear around what happens to them when they get in the water. They, when you eliminate that first piece, it makes things a lot easier. But I also hear what you're saying about not giving up, that it requires, because it's practice, because it's smaller little movements, that you are um, achieving the goal over a longer period of time. But that, in my hopeful way of thinking, that it's worth it, because at the end, even along the way, you're learning to think differently, and actually reinforcing more healthy ways of getting in a better place.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah.
Yay. I am
Yeah.
learning something, Loretta.
And
Look at
the more
that.
healthy way is of your own choosing. That's what I always emphasize, that your brain is motivated to seek rewards. And so if you want to stop some old thing, you have to offer your brain a new reward. And a lot of times people make rewards taboo, and they think, oh, I have to give up all these rewards and just focus on doing push-ups and eating kale. And that's not motivating. So we can design new rewards to get ourselves motivated in new ways that are fun, that we want to do it.
I'm always looking for the hope. So that, to me, gives me hope to think I could have a fun thing while I'm relearning. And yes, and I'm doing something new. That would be, um, it gives you permission, I guess, to say, okay, so at the end of this thing, I'm going to be able to look differently at this process. Um, I'm fascinated too by the concept that you were using earlier about the lion bites you, you pull away. We don't have that direct correlation as well when it comes to the mental piece, the emotional side of what you're talking about. How can we see those moments a little bit easier, um, in a way that isn't just, being bit? That's a little bit easier to track and to follow. How can we be more aware of whether it be that it's a memory? How can we be more, I guess, in tune?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so it helps to think about, I always like to think about the difference between the verbal brain and the emotional brain. So um, the emotional brain is responding like, this is bad for me. And then the verbal brain wants to help. So the verbal brain looks for a way to explain what bad thing is going on. So both of these brains are trained from past experience, but the verbal brain is the one you're listening to. So what are you telling yourself when you feel bad? It's like, they did this to me. They want me to feel bad. They don't care about me. They always do this. Whatever, usually it's like they. Or it could be I, like, I'm such an idiot.
Yes.
Why
Yes.
didn't I realize, so whatever you're telling yourself verbally, you believe that. and you don't really like that's all triggered by this emotional chemical, but we're consciously aware of the words more than the chemical. So listen to the words, try to notice the chemical, because then you can say to yourself, okay, I'm feeling bad because this chemical was released because of an old pathway. And I'm explaining the threat to myself in a way that fits the pattern of what happened to me when I was young. What threats did I feel when I was young? How did I explain them when I was young? How did I learn the words that I attached to that explanation? How did the people around me explain their early threats and pain? And then when you see the pattern, then you say, oh, yeah, it's just an old pathway. I'm doing that to myself.
And I can undo that myself as a result. So then your response can then be more healthy, I guess. And how do we find a more healthy way, or a less threatening way, to use your words, of getting to that new place?
So first, it's like the self-acceptance of like, you're doing this because this is how every brain works. And again, it's like your brain is, the electricity in your brain is flowing like a river, and whatever are the biggest pathways created by your unique past experience, you're just flowing into that. And so the idea is to carve a new canal in your brain. And that takes a lot of digging. But what I find so fascinating, it's so hard to believe. Like, what? I'm just creating this? When I first learned that, I was insulted. And a lot of people are insulted when they hear this, because you want to think, well, if that's all there were to it, then I would have already fixed it.
Exactly. That you think, well, if I had this much power, then why have I been beating myself up for the past umpty ump years, or whatever that looks like? I can absolutely relate to that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's just, that's why I think the self acceptance piece is so important, to say, this is how every brain works, because we are born with no neural pathways. We have a lot of neurons, but they're not connected. And we connect them from whatever happens to us. That's how the connections build. And the pain chemicals and reward chemicals are like paving on the neural pathways that make them bigger so that they invite your electricity later on. So if I want to now feel something different, it feels fake. It sounds fake. So the way I prove this to myself is I read a lot of biographies, and I'm amazed to see, when you read about the childhood of a famous person, you see that their childhood was just like a mini pattern of whatever they were doing later on. So their later life was just acting on the template that was created by their childhood. It's really amazing, um, just so really read biographies with that really go into depth about the childhood.
I really like that concept of looking at it like a template. That it still gives that ability to change it. You can edit the template, but it is just a template. It is just a framework that we kind of worked with and thought was right, or thought was real, and then be able to take that and run with it.
Yeah,
It's really
exactly.
interesting.
Now, the next thing is, if I want to dig this new channel in my brain, it would be nice if somebody else could do it for me. And there are so many people out there saying, oh, yeah, I'll do it for you. I'll do it for you. And that is like, the word treatment creates this illusion that you could just let someone do it for you. And that's another problem.
Right. I mean, we really do have to not just do
Dig.
the work, but we have
Yeah.
to actually want to keep going, right? To your earlier point, you'll give up if you don't want to get to a better place, because it is not super motivating to sit and do similar things over and over again and not really see giant improvement.
Well,
We may not
everyone
even
wants to
see
get
achievement
to
of
a better place. Everyone wants that. But the bottom line is, everyone is scared to leave the place they're already in. So that's the,
There is comfort in the knowing, right?
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's so amazing how people repeat things that they hate. It's amazing. And everyone does it. So, and everyone has their own little different variation of it. So it's helpful to think of it as a real pathway that when you think about leaving that pathway, it feels like you don't know what's going on, because the feeling of I know what's going on is that electricity whooshing in the big pathway. So redirecting your electricity from the river to the soda straw, that's a skill. So the first thing is to build the skill, to know that you have the skill. And then the other thing is that mild pathways tell me what to do in an emergency. So if you feel like, oh, this is a real emergency and I'm going to ignore it, that feels unsafe. But that's really what we're asking our brain to do, is to say, no, it's not a real emergency. So don't do your usual response because it's not a real emergency. So that's scary.
and to our brains, inaccurate, because our brains have thought this whole time, yeah, huh, that's what you told me all those years ago. That's what I need to do. And so I can see how that disconnect can be
Mm.
difficult, disconcerting, but I've done it too. And I know exactly that feeling of, why am I panicking? And then you have to dig in and back up into why that's happening and realize, just to
Yes.
what you
And you
described,
know
that
what? The first time I figured this out, when you say dig into what's happening, the thing that happened had happened like 3 to 5 minutes ago. And like I had practically forgotten it. And I was like, what am I feeling bad about? Because I was in a beautiful environment with good stuff. And then I thought, oh, like 5 minutes ago, this triggering thing happened and it was so small. But that chemical, it takes a whole hour to for your body to metabolize it. Yeah.
wow, so then that takes me to your original point about cortisol, and how so many of us, myself included, I say us on purpose, that live sort of in this survival mode, where there's this constant state of cortisol flowing. Without that, it does feel as though you are that's the threat,
Mm, mm,
because
mm.
I'm so used to being a little bit amped up that I don't know what it's like when that dips, or when I
Mm.
relax, as people say they can't
Yeah.
ever relax.
And also, you don't necessarily what triggered it, because it could have been 5 or 10 minutes ago and your conscious brain already forgot it. Or your conscious brain would say, oh, I wouldn't get upset about something like that. But you got upset because what was happening fit the template of what in your past, either it was, people might think it's something bad, but it could be like something bad would happen if you don't do the right thing. So it's that fear of leaving the path.
That's really, really cool. Um, okay, so we've talked about the triggers. We've talked about the threats themselves. We've talked about how to get back on track. Talk to us about when we feel safe, what that feels like in our bodies, what chemicals are flowing through us when we feel safe and when we feel like we are on the right path.
So, safety is this modern concept that a lot of people are selling, but I'm not a real big believer in it, because then it becomes like an excuse. It's like, well, it's your fault that you didn't make me feel safe, you know? Um, so I look at happy chemicals from an animal perspective. Like if an animal sat around, saying, do I feel safe? Then they would starve to death because they have to find food constantly in order to survive. So they're balancing the threat of starving against the threat of getting eaten by a predator. So they're always weighing them, and they're saying, which threat is more immediate? And I'm going to focus on that. And then When I focus on that, I take action. And when I find a successful way to meet that need or fix that threat, then a positive feeling dopamine is released. So we're always looking for that dopamine of meeting the need and relieving the threat.
Cool. So almost like the positive result or um, the absence of threat. Is that a better way to describe it than really safety, but more like, "Okay, good. I've eaten, I've had water, I
Well,
don't
I
have."
think met the need.
Okay,
Met the need. And
okay.
sometimes it's a real physical need, but in the modern world, it's often it's often a social need. And the social need is that people want they want recognition. And then we don't necessarily have realistic expectations about recognition because,
What?
yeah.
No, not human. Surely not
So,
humans.
we're born screaming for attention, and that urge to scream for attention is always there. And what I say is that we're born with a natural urge to want to be special in a world where 8 billion other people want to be special. So it's a natural, healthy impulse, and yet it can't be met all the time. So we have to manage that.
And some of us do it healthy in a healthy way, and some of us don't because we weren't taught that when we were young enough to have that pathway driven into our brains.
And I don't even know if there's like a healthy way to do it. Like, I don't really divide the world into healthy people and unhealthy people because, if there's this land of healthy people, I haven't found it. All we have is our next step. If I look at it from animal perspective, so is like in my next step, how can I relieve cortisol in a way that's not going to cause more cortisol in the long run? And it's like, oh, I have an idea. I should do this. And then I take that step and I trigger a good feeling. But then maybe it gets good results, maybe it doesn't. But then I have my next step.
That and thinking about that metabolism piece of it taking an hour for everything to regulate again or everything to get back to equilibrium is really fascinating because you don't if you aren't aware and you don't put yourself in a position where you can create a positive outcome, where you can say the need is met, then the hour starts over, right? That you've got another trigger that has now boosted the cortisol again, and then now you've reset the timer. Is that a true statement?
Yeah, I call it a cortisol spiral. And I wrote a book about this. It's called Tame Your Anxiety. I'd be happy to give you a free PDF if you want.
Would love it. That would be life giving
Thank
for
you.
me.
And
I definitely did not even see this correlation before we started talking. So this is really fascinating.
so here's an important thing when I say it takes an hour, it has a half life of 20 minutes. In the first 20 minutes, you get rid of half of it. So then by 40 minutes, you've gotten rid of 75% of it, if that makes sense.
It
And
does.
so what I tell people is if you first feel this surge, it's important to do something fun in that time and not just rush into problem solving. Because if you rush into problem solving, you're only going to see the negative side of all of your um, of all of your solutions.
Of course, we want to do because we want to feel better. So we think if we hurry up that we're going to feel better, but that's not the truth.
Yeah. And then you're going to just look for, so what I say is when you smell a predator, then you look for a predator. So when you feel bad and then you're only looking for bad evidence to say, see, I knew it. I knew they were going to try to get me or whatever, you're trying to beef up your own case. So you're better off waiting until 20 to 40 minutes, do something fun in that time. However, you don't want to do something too fun because if you say, whenever I feel bad, I'm going to order a pizza and open a bottle of wine, then that wires your brain to actually find threats to give yourself an excuse to order pizza and wine.
Wow. Okay. And this is where I remember back when I first got married that, um, our our preacher, who happened to be my husband's aunt, said, "Don't react immediately. If you feel
Hmm.
slighted or you're
Oh,
in an argument
yeah,
or
yeah, yeah,
whatever,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
that concept of take a minute, don't try to keep from saying something prideful because you will in those moments because you're operating in your animal brain in that first 20 minutes until that calms down, right?"
Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, they are going to do the same.
Right. Then it just keeps on escalating, right? And that's bad. But that also is the same thing that I've learned as a parent, that in de-escalating with your children, that first little bit of panic that they have is also temporary and can, if with a few deep breaths and a little bit of waiting, we can
Yeah,
move through that
yeah.
too. Is that 20 minutes the same no matter what age you are? Or does that matter as to how developed your brain is? Or one of them, or
No, but I would think it's metabolism, I would think. Yeah. Yeah, don't mess with the kid for the first 20 minutes, but
at least 5, right, Loretta? I
yeah,
mean, gotta give
yeah,
them at
yeah.
least a minute.
But they may have like, they may rush into the quick response. And the interesting and sad thing, now I'm a grandparent, now I see it like if their first response is to have a nasty reaction, um, it's unpleasant and it's hard to deal with, but remember that we're all born crying, and like toddlers have tantrums and they have like years of getting rewards by exploding in rage. And it's not a conscious thing, it's a real neural pathway that, like, well, I'm going to scream and you're going to take care of me. Isn't that how this deal works? You know? And
Mhm.
then
It's pretty much proven that that's what we do.
we've been doing it that way for years, and now you're taking it away from me. If
Yeah.
you take it away, I'll die, because that's how a child's brain is like. If you take away this blanket of protection, I'll die. They're not going to give it up voluntarily.
That's so interesting. And then in those moments when there is a break, where a child experiences a lack of, um, needs being met, so that then that's the consistency that you build, which then is a broken framework that has to be rewired later, that not everything is going to harm you, not everything is meant to threaten you, those kinds of things. So wow, that is so cool. That's so
Yeah, and
cool.
when you say not everything, that's kind of too complex of a thought for the animal brain. So to put it in the positive is to say things will work out. My needs will be met. I will be fine, the help. I will get what I need, you know? And then a teen has to trust that they can get what they need, because they come to the awareness that the parent won't be around forever, that people grow up and have to meet their own needs. And most important, your parent cannot get you a romantic partner.
A or a I guess in the case of, again, thinking about protection, that's just where my brain naturally goes, but in that case, in the animal brain case, thinking about a strong partner that would help you look for food, protect the young, those kinds of things that we are sort of
Mm,
ingrained to think about.
mm, mm.
Um, our parents don't, even in the animal world, parents don't do that, right?
Yeah, you have to
You
get
have
it
to do it
yourself.
yourself.
But they're already trained, because guess what? A monkey is never given solid food. They get mother's milk, and then if they want any solids, they have to get it themselves. So this whole having to get it yourself is ingrained in an early age. Whereas today we're teaching kids that you could get your parents' credit card and call for a pizza delivery and it just comes.
It does
So,
make things a little different, doesn't it?
yeah, so
Our
it's not
own
really building the neural pathways of either taking action to meet your needs or having confidence in your ability to take action to meet your needs.
plus we have several thousand options as opposed to being a lion that eats meat. There's and I agree that there are several thousand options of meat, but the difference between a plant and a meat. So it seems pretty black and white to me in that way.
Mhm.
But we as humans being
Yeah.
omnivores makes
So
things
here's a challenge for a lion. So they miss 95% of the time. And a lion can only catch prey on a full tank of energy. So each time it misses, then it has to rest for a while before it can try again. It can, and you see in these nature videos, sometimes it goes hungry for a week because, so there's a lot of pressure of like, if I pick that target and miss, then I've blown my energy.
and um there's all constant learning about a better way to do it,
Yes,
right? Or
exactly.
if I run, but if I cut this way, I'll
Yes.
catch it faster or whatever. That's so wow, they're older and,
Yeah.
all those things. It gives me hope to think about the fact that we're always learning. We're always trying to think of a better way to get our needs met.
Yeah. And if a lion wouldn't like blame, like, well, it's your fault that I didn't catch the gazelle, because then they wouldn't learn. I mean, they don't have the brain. So if we use our abstract brain to blame other people, then we miss out on what we could have learned.
And we stay stuck. Yeah. I definitely I love that correlation that you just made in that I never really thought about the concept of being stuck, meaning that I was no longer learning, that I was not actively trying to be creative to find a solution
Mm,
or even just another way. It may not be the solution, but just another solution to what the problem is. That's really, really powerful to think the action is learning. By taking action, you're learning, and by learning, you are creating a better pathway and another pathway, another solution that wasn't there
mm,
before.
mm, mm.
You just blew my brain. Um,
Good,
I
good.
am I literally am thinking in my brain that it feels like I'm putting blocks together.
Oh,
I'm
good.
I'm
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I have a row of blocks and I just added blocks on top of that to make a more sturdy structure, a better framework to look at what is happening to me. And that self-awareness that you've already talked about, that piece that where you say, I am an animal, that my brain is responding in a way that it is meant to respond. That way is no longer serving me, so I am going to do something about it and make it do something else, but it is doing what it is supposed to do. And that gives
Yeah.
us it gives us a
Rather
way.
than thinking about it as like a mental health problem or a
Right.
disorder or something. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely a problem where, like, well, I'm just broken. There's just something wrong with me. No, there isn't. We're not learning. We've gone away from that learning piece. I think that is so cool.
Yeah. Well, or
Again, gives
to
hope.
just say that we all have a spaghetti of neurons. And if you have a neural pathway that's leading to something that doesn't serve you, you can dig a new pathway, but it's a lot of digging.
It's not an instant
Yeah. Yeah.
process. It's not gonna be, especially if you're years old like I am and trying to figure out how to undo some of those, right? And some of those pathways you don't even know exists right
Exactly.
now. I mean, you don't they're so deeply ingrained that you don't see them yet, but you do know that there's something not working. You
Yeah.
do see,
Yeah.
that lack of function or whatever you wanna call it, that presents itself that way.
Yeah.
I find it so fascinating.
Yeah. It's hard for us to believe, like, that we have such strong feelings about such small things that we think, well, there has to be a good reason. I'm just thinking, like, my husband was young, like, you were not like, there's every family has rules about eating. Like, you're not allowed to eat in this room or that room, or can't eat in the car, you can't eat standing up or whatever. And like, then how do you feel about the rule? How do you feel about breaking the rule? Whatever, however you responded when you were young, whether you were like so terrified of getting in trouble or you were so committed to breaking the rule, whatever that is, you're still doing that, you know?
Yeah, and usually on more fronts than just food, but that's our basic that's the basic need, right? That's the thing that we learn right away. I mean, to your point from early on in the conversation about we're born crying, and then we figure out if we cry, we get food.
Well, here's the thing about what really matters. So it only an unmet need triggers dopamine. So you really, really want something until you get it. And once you get it, the dopamine stops. And then it takes something else to spark your dopamine. So this is why people are always sort of looking for the next thing. But the next thing is usually in the same kind of variety of thing of what your past dopamine pathways are.
Because that's what you know. That makes a lot of sense based on what you've explained to us and described to us so far. If you had a parting thought to give to the audience that would give them something to chew on, what would you say?
Well, I always want to be sure to get in the topic of social comparison. So this is another universal animal impulse. It's hard to believe, universal for mammals. So mammals are very competitive because if they get more food and mating opportunity when they are more competitive, and that spreads their genes. So we've inherited our genes from individuals who were competing, and we don't like to think that. And so we see it in other people, but we don't want to see it in ourselves. But the problem is we think, well, I'm not competitive. But then when you feel like you're in the one down position, it feels like a survival threat, because in the animal world, that means you're going to starve and your genes are going to get wiped out. So then it's like, I don't want to be nasty, but I don't want to be in the one down position either. So there's no easy answer to that. And so I explained, I hope I didn't say this yet, like, we have a brain that wants to be special. So everybody else wants to be special. So we just have to take it with a little grain of salt. Like, if I manage to succeed at being special, my happy chemicals are triggered and I feel good, but that's only going to last for a few minutes. And then I'm going to be back to normal. If I try to be special and I fail, my threat chemicals are triggered, and then my verbal brain will say, "Oh, blah 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 blah." So this is what people are doing all the time. This is what mammals are doing all the time.
All of our waking moments. And then it's funny because we also have this, especially socially, to try to stop ourselves from competing against each other and stop comparing ourselves to each other, but it is built into our mammalian character. That is never knew that before. You're just
Yeah,
you're
and
just
so even if a person thinks they're not competitive, but and that's good. But then there's two things. Either you're competing in some way and you're saying, oh, well, I'm just doing it for the greater good, or, the way I'm doing it is better than at least I'm not doing blah, blah, blah. Or the other thing is you're really not competitive, but you're saying, I'm always losing to other people who are competitive, and I'm always in the one down position, and it's so unfair. And then you Yeah,
Yeah.
you ruin your life from that.
Right. It's all everybody else's fault. The accountability then shifts, and there's no accountability at all on the back end.
Mm.
How can we work with you? How can we find you? How can we find your books? How can we get in touch with you and work with you more?
Thank you. So my website is innermammalinstitute.org, innermammalinstitute.org. And I have all my books, videos. Happy to do coaching, and I have a free 5-day Happy Chemical Jumpstart. You put your email at the bottom, and you get one email a day for 5 days on each of 5 happy chemicals.
Perfect. That sounds fun. I definitely will put the website in the show notes, but I'll probably be visiting in just a few minutes. Um, I am so thankful for this time that we had together. Thank you so much for being willing, and thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. This is really, really, really powerful.
Well, thank you so much for getting it. It's such a pleasure to talk to someone who gets it.
I at least learned something. I don't know that I totally would say that I have knowledge, but I'm really excited to learn more. So thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.